The rancher, named Daniel, had lived on the edge of the small rural town for nearly 2 decades. His life was quiet, simple, and, to many, lonely. He had inherited the land from his father, who had taught him everything about ranching, about raising cattle, and about respecting the land. Daniel never married. Friends were few, and family even fewer. Most people in the town knew him as the quiet man who kept to himself, a man of few words but steady hands. He preferred the company of his fields, his cattle, and the wide-open sky over the noise and drama of town life. Every morning, Daniel would wake before sunrise. The first thing he did was step out onto his porch, feeling the cool morning air and listening to the faint sounds of the farm waking up. He could hear the soft lowing of his cows from the distant fields, the rustling of leaves as the wind moved gently across the prairie, and the occasional chirping of birds welcoming the day. For Daniel, these were comforting sounds, far better than any conversation he could have had in town. He would sip his black coffee slowly, letting the warmth seep through his hands while he mentally planned the day. Today, like every other day, would begin with feeding the cattle, checking the fences, and repairing any broken equipment before the sun climbed too high. His ranch was modest but well-maintained. A small, weathered farmhouse stood at the center, surrounded by acres of golden fields and green pastures. A wooden fence lined the property, some sections slightly worn but still sturdy enough to keep the cattle from wandering off. Daniel spent many days repairing the fences, painting the barn, and tending to the fields. Every nail he hammered, every plank he replaced, reminded him that he was building not just a home, but a life connected to the land. Despite the solitude, Daniel was content with his life. He enjoyed the rhythm of farm work, the predictable patterns of feeding and caring for the animals, and the simple pleasures of a quiet evening by the fireplace. He read old books, listened to the radio, and sometimes wandered through the fields, thinking about memories of his father and the life lessons he had passed down. Yet, beneath the calm surface, there was a subtle ache, a yearning for connection, for someone to share his days with, someone to break the monotony of silence. He never admitted it, not even to himself, but he sometimes imagined having a neighbor who might come over to chat, or a friend who could sit on the porch with him and watch the sunset. Daniel's interactions with the townspeople were limited. He went into town only for essential supplies: feed for the animals, tools for repairs, or groceries. On these rare trips, he was polite but reserved, answering questions with short, precise sentences and keeping to himself. The townspeople respected him for his hard work and honesty, but they also found him mysterious. A man who seemed to carry the weight of solitude like a shield. Children would sometimes wave as he passed in his old pickup truck, and he would nod gently, giving a small smile that rarely reached his eyes. One quiet morning, as Daniel walked to the barn, he noticed something unusual. A small disturbance in the tall grass caught his attention. At first, he thought it might have been an animal, a fox or a stray deer moving through the field. But as he looked closer, he saw footprints, strange footprints that did not belong to any of his cattle. They were human, small, and light, as if someone had walked carefully, almost tiptoeing. Daniel's brow furrowed. He looked around, scanning the wide expanse of his property. Everything seemed calm, as if the world had not noticed anything unusual. He shrugged and shook his head, thinking perhaps it was a passerby or a lost child from the town. But there was a small, uneasy feeling creeping into his chest. A flicker of worry that he tried to dismiss. Daniel continued with his day, but the feeling lingered. He checked the fences again, inspected the barn, and made sure the cattle were all accounted for. Each task he performed, he did with precision. Yet his mind wandered back to the footprints. Who could it have been? And why on his land? He tried to convince himself that it was nothing, but the thought refused to leave him. By midday, the sun was high, casting long shadows across the fields, and Daniel finally allowed himself a moment to rest. Sitting on the edge of the barn steps, he looked out over the golden fields and sighed. This ranch had always been his sanctuary, a place of peace and solitude. And yet, the unexpected disturbance reminded him that even in the quietest of places, life could surprise you. As the day passed, Daniel began noticing other small signs, subtle hints that someone might have been around. A gate left slightly ajar, a tool moved from its usual place, and faint traces of footprints near the old Scarecrow standing in the middle of one of the fields. The Scarecrow had been there for years, a simple creation of straw, old clothes, and a hat. It was meant to keep the birds away. But over time, it had become a quiet sentinel, watching over the land as Daniel worked. Now, seeing the footprints around it, Daniel's unease grew. He walked carefully through the field, examining the Scarecrow and the area around it. Nothing seemed out of place until he noticed a small piece of torn fabric hanging from one of the Scarecrow's arms. Daniel picked up the fabric and examined it. It was soft, thin, and not something he recognized from his own clothing. His heart began to beat faster, a knot of worry tightening in his stomach. He thought about the children from the town, the few visitors who sometimes wandered near the edges of his property, and even strangers who might pass through. Yet nothing explained why someone would leave a piece of fabric hanging on the Scarecrow. The day wore on, and Daniel tried to focus on work, but the feeling of unease lingered like a shadow. Every rustle of the wind, every distant sound made him pause and look around, half expecting to see someone watching from the tree line. As evening approached, Daniel finished his chores and returned to the farmhouse. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He sat on his porch, sipping tea and trying to shake off the growing sense of tension. The land was quiet, but the silence no longer felt comforting. It felt heavy, charged with the unknown. Daniel thought about locking the gates and securing everything for the night, even though he had done so many times before. Something had changed today, though he could not put his finger on exactly what it was. Night fell, and Daniel went inside, locking the doors behind him. He tried to read, to keep his mind occupied, but every creak of the house, every whisper of wind through the trees made him pause. Memories of past storms, of lonely nights spent in the dark with only the sounds of the animals for company, came back to him. He realized that while he had always been alone, he had never truly felt unsafe. Tonight, that feeling had shifted, replaced by a sense that someone or something was out there, watching, waiting. Before going to bed, Daniel stepped outside one last time, glancing over the fields. The moon cast a pale light across the land, illuminating the Scarecrow in the distance. He felt a shiver run down his spine, not from cold but from the unknown. Something about the way it stood there seemed different tonight. More deliberate, more purposeful. Daniel shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought, but the unease stayed with him as he went to sleep. In his dreams that night, Daniel saw flashes of movement in the fields, shadows moving between the rows of crops, and a faint figure that seemed to vanish whenever he approached. He woke with a start, the unease from the day clinging to him. The world outside was quiet, peaceful even, but the feeling in his chest told him that something had shifted. Daniel could not have known that the next day would bring a shock unlike anything he had ever experienced, something that would change his life forever. The morning sun rose slowly over Daniel's ranch, casting a warm, golden light over the fields. Birds sang in the distance, and the air smelled faintly of fresh earth and hay. For Daniel, mornings were usually peaceful, a time to prepare for the day's work. He had learned long ago that starting early was the key to managing a ranch successfully. But this morning was different. The unease from the day before had not left him. The footprints, the torn fabric on the Scarecrow, and the strange feeling in the air all seemed more vivid now, like pieces of a puzzle he did not yet understand. Daniel walked out of the farmhouse, carrying his coffee in a sturdy metal mug. He scanned the fields, as he always did, checking on the cattle first. They were grazing quietly, unaware of the tension that had settled over the ranch. The familiar routine should have brought comfort, but his eyes kept returning to the Scarecrow in the middle of the cornfield. Something about it seemed off. He could not explain why, but a shiver ran down his spine. As he approached the Scarecrow, he noticed a faint movement near it. At first, he thought it was one of the animals, perhaps a fox or a stray bird. But the shape did not move like any animal he knew. He squinted in the morning sunlight, focusing on the figure. And then he saw it clearly. There was a human shape tied to the Scarecrow, swaying slightly in the breeze. Daniel froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He blinked, thinking he must be seeing things. But when he took another step forward, the figure became unmistakable. It was a young girl, no older than 15, tied tightly to the Scarecrow's wooden frame. Her hair hung loosely around her face, and her clothes were slightly torn, dusty from being dragged across the ground. Panic and disbelief surged through Daniel. His first thought was confusion. How had she gotten there? Who would do such a thing? And why? But then, his eyes fell on something even more shocking. Written boldly across her chest, in what looked like marker or paint, was his name. Daniel's breath caught. His hands shook, and he felt a cold sweat running down his back. This was no random act of mischief. It was personal. Someone had deliberately done this. And the fact that his name was written on her chest made it clear that he was being targeted in some way. Fear, anger, and helplessness collided in his mind, leaving him momentarily frozen in place. He took a cautious step closer, his mind racing with questions. The girl's eyes were wide, filled with fear and confusion, and she tried to speak, but her voice was weak and trembling. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He needed to help her, to get her out of this dangerous situation. Kneeling carefully, he checked the ropes, tying her to the Scarecrow. They were tight but not impossible to undo. His hands moved quickly, working to free her while trying to offer reassurance. "It's okay, you're safe now," he said softly, though his own voice shook. "I've got you, you're okay." The girl whimpered, her body trembling as she was finally released from the ropes. Daniel helped her to her feet, holding her gently but firmly to make sure she did not fall. She leaned on him for support, still in shock, unable to speak clearly. Daniel guided her to a nearby patch of grass, where she could sit and rest. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He needed to act fast. Daniel ran back to the farmhouse and grabbed his phone, his fingers fumbling slightly as he dialed 911. He explained the situation to the dispatcher, his voice tight with urgency. "There's a girl, tied to a Scarecrow, on my property. She's safe now, but she needs help. Please, hurry." The dispatcher assured him that police and emergency services were on the way, asking him to stay on the line and keep the girl calm. Returning to the girl, Daniel knelt beside her, offering water from a bottle he had in his truck. She took small sips, her hands trembling as she held the bottle. He noticed bruises forming on her wrists and arms from the ropes, but thankfully, there were no serious injuries. Still, the sight of her fear-stricken eyes haunted him. He spoke softly, trying to comfort her. "You're safe now, I promise. No one is going to hurt you here." She nodded slightly, tears streaming down her face, but could not find the words to respond. As they waited, Daniel looked around the fields, scanning for any clues about who could have done this. The Scarecrow stood like a silent witness to the scene, its tattered clothes fluttering in the breeze. He wondered if the perpetrator had watched him, if they had planned this carefully, or if it had been a random act. His mind ran through every possibility. Every interaction he had had in town. Every person who might hold a grudge. Nothing made sense. Soon, the distant sound of sirens broke through the morning calm. Daniel could see the flashing lights of police cars approaching from the road. Relief mixed with anxiety as he waved them down, explaining everything in hurried, clipped sentences. Officers rushed to the scene, securing the area and taking statements. Paramedics arrived, checking the girl for injuries and offering her comfort. Daniel stepped back, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The immediate danger was over. But the questions lingered. Who had done this? Why had they targeted him? The investigation began quickly. Officers photographed the scene, collected evidence, and questioned Daniel and the girl. The girl, though scared, described very little. Her voice trembled, and she seemed hesitant to share details. Daniel tried to reassure her, telling her she had done the right thing by staying calm and letting him help her. The officers were kind, professional, and patient, understanding that the girl had gone through a terrifying experience. Word of the incident spread quickly through the small town. Neighbors and townspeople began to gather near the edge of the ranch, anxious to know what had happened. Some whispered among themselves, speculating about who could have done such a thing. Others offered support, bringing blankets, water, and words of comfort. Daniel felt a mixture of gratitude and discomfort at the attention. He had always valued his privacy, but now the town's concern felt like a shield against the fear and uncertainty that gripped him. As the girl was taken to a nearby hospital for further examination, Daniel stayed behind with the officers, answering questions about his property, his routine, and any possible threats. He described the footprints, the torn fabric, and the Scarecrow. Every detail mattered, and he tried to be as precise as possible. His hands were still trembling, his heart still racing, but he remained focused. The police took notes carefully, promising to investigate thoroughly and leave no stone unturned. Later that evening, Daniel sat alone in his farmhouse, staring out at the fields where the Scarecrow still stood. The events of the day weighed heavily on him. He thought about the girl, her fear, and the bravery it must have taken to stay calm. He thought about the person who had done this, someone who had deliberately caused fear and pain. A sense of responsibility settled over him. He had been the one to find her, to save her. And now he had to live with the memory of what he had seen. Despite the fear, Daniel felt a quiet determination. He would protect his land, his home, and his community. He would not allow fear to take control, even though he knew that the days ahead would bring more questions than answers. Something had changed in the quiet life he had built for himself. The peaceful solitude he had cherished now felt fragile, vulnerable to the unpredictability of human intentions. That night, Daniel walked out onto the porch, the cool breeze brushing against his face. The Scarecrow stood in the distance, a reminder of the day's shocking events. He wondered about the girl, hoping she was safe and beginning to recover. He wondered about the person who had tied her there, hoping the authorities would find them quickly, and he thought about himself. A man who had lived a solitary life, suddenly thrown into a situation that demanded courage, compassion, and vigilance. As he gazed at the stars, Daniel realized that life on the ranch would never feel the same. The quiet mornings, the predictable routines, and the peaceful fields were now intertwined with a memory of fear, shock, and responsibility. But he also knew that he had acted with strength and humanity, saving a life when it mattered most. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of connection not just to the land he loved, but to the people around him, to the town that cared, and to the young girl whose life had crossed his path in the most unexpected way. The following morning, Daniel woke to a quiet house. The sun was just beginning to cast light over the fields, painting the land in soft gold. Despite the calm, Daniel could not shake the memory of the previous day. The image of the girl tied to the Scarecrow, the stark letters of his name across her chest, and the terror in her eyes lingered in his mind. It had been a shocking discovery, one that changed the sense of safety he had always felt on his ranch. Now, he knew life would be different. He dressed quickly and stepped outside, taking a long look at the Scarecrow in the field. The figure of straw and old clothes still stood where the girl had been tied. It looked ordinary, harmless even. But to Daniel, it was a reminder of something dark and inexplicable. He felt a mixture of fear and anger. How could someone commit such an act on his property? Why had they chosen him and a child to involve in this terrifying event? These questions swirled in his mind, unanswered and pressing. The police had promised to investigate thoroughly. Daniel had given them every detail he could recall. The footprints, the torn fabric, the location of the Scarecrow, and the girl's reaction. Officers had assured him that they would do everything possible to find the person responsible. Still, waiting was difficult. In a small town, news of such a crime traveled fast, and soon the story had reached everyone. People whispered in the streets, Neighbors speculated quietly over fences, and Daniel felt eyes on him wherever he went. The town's reaction was immediate and strong. Some residents were fearful, wondering if their children were safe, while others were angry on Daniel's behalf. People he had barely spoken to over the years now stopped by the edge of his property, offering words of comfort, blankets, and food. Daniel felt gratitude, but also discomfort. He had lived much of his life quietly, enjoying solitude. Suddenly, he was the center of attention, and the intense focus made him uneasy. Still, he appreciated the concern. It reminded him that, despite the distance he had maintained, there was a network of people willing to support him when it mattered most. The investigation began in earnest. Officers returned to the ranch several times, collecting samples from the field, examining the Scarecrow, and searching for evidence. They took photographs from multiple angles, recorded footprints, and analyzed the torn fabric Daniel had found the day before. Forensic teams moved with precision, carefully documenting everything to ensure nothing was missed. Daniel watched their work closely, feeling both anxious and hopeful. He wanted answers, a reason behind the horrific act that had taken place on his land. Meanwhile, the girl had been taken to the hospital. Daniel learned that she was physically unharmed, though deeply shaken. She had minor abrasions from the ropes, but no serious injuries. The medical staff praised her for staying calm and cooperative, which made it easier to assess her condition. Daniel was relieved to hear that she was safe and beginning to recover, though he worried about the emotional impact of such a traumatic experience. The police had promised to speak with her further, hoping she could provide clues about the person responsible. In the days that followed, Daniel found himself restless. He spent long hours walking the fields, checking the fences, and talking to the cattle. Yet even these familiar tasks did not ease his mind. He replayed the events in his head repeatedly, discovering the girl, freeing her, and watching the first responders arrive. The memory was vivid and unshakable. He felt a sense of responsibility not just for the girl's immediate safety, but for the broader implications of what had occurred. The ranch had always been his sanctuary, but now it felt vulnerable. Officers returned again to speak with Daniel about potential motives. They asked if he had any enemies, if he had received threats, or if there were disputes in town. Daniel shook his head. He was a quiet man, focused on his work, with no reason to make enemies. He described his interactions with townspeople, all peaceful and respectful. The officers listened carefully, nodding as they took notes. It became clear that this was not a simple crime of opportunity. Whoever had tied the girl to the Scarecrow had planned it deliberately, chosen the location, and left a message by writing Daniel's name on her chest. The personal nature of the act was alarming. The community's concern did not diminish. People came by more frequently, offering help and checking on the ranch. Some brought supplies for Daniel, knowing he often struggled to restock without frequent trips to town. Others brought gifts for the girl, small tokens to show that she was not alone and that the town supported her. Daniel appreciated the gestures, though he remained reserved. It was not easy for him to accept kindness, but he understood its importance. The town was rallying together, and he realized he was not as alone as he had once believed. News reporters arrived, curious about the shocking incident. They asked questions, took photographs, and interviewed neighbors. Daniel declined to speak publicly, wanting to protect both himself and the girl. He felt the attention was overwhelming, even intrusive, and preferred to focus on the investigation and the recovery of the young girl. Still, he could not escape the sense that everyone was watching, waiting for answers. Every stranger's glance felt like a question. Every whisper in the street felt like speculation. It was exhausting. But Daniel resolved to remain steady and composed. The girl, meanwhile, began to share small details about her ordeal. Her voice was quiet, and her words were hesitant. But she described being approached and tied to the Scarecrow. She could not identify the person responsible, which frustrated both her and the investigators. Daniel listened carefully when he visited her at the hospital, offering comfort and reassurance. "You were very brave," he told her gently. You stayed calm, and that helped us keep you safe. You did the right thing. She smiled faintly, grateful for his presence, and for the first time, seemed a little less frightened. As the investigation continued, Daniel became more aware of the vulnerability of his property. He installed extra locks on gates, added motion-sensitive lights around the farmhouse, and even considered security cameras for the first time. The Scarecrow remained in the field, a silent reminder of the events, and he could not bring himself to remove it immediately. It was a part of what had happened, a symbol of the fear that had intruded into his quiet life. But it also became a motivator, a reason to be vigilant, prepared, and cautious. Neighbors shared their own experiences and suspicions, offering any information they had. A local farmer mentioned seeing a car parked near the outskirts of Daniel's property the previous week. A teenager recalled a stranger asking questions about the ranch. Small details, seemingly insignificant on their own, began to form a picture that the investigators hoped to piece together. Daniel provided every bit of information he could remember, knowing that even the smallest clue could be critical. The emotional toll of the incident weighed heavily on Daniel. Nights were the hardest. He would lie awake, imagining what could have happened if he had not found the girl, replaying scenarios in his mind, and wondering about the person who had committed the act. The fear that someone had violated the sanctuary of his land was difficult to accept. Yet alongside the fear was a quiet sense of pride. He had acted decisively, saved the girl, and helped ensure justice could be pursued. He had faced a moment of terror with courage, something he had never imagined he would have to do. The town, too, began to show signs of solidarity. People came together to discuss ways to protect children, to ensure that no one else would face such danger. Community meetings were held, and plans for better safety measures were suggested. Daniel attended some of these gatherings, listening quietly and offering practical advice from his perspective as a rancher. Though he was reserved, he realized the importance of community in preventing future incidents. The experience had taught him that even a solitary life could benefit from connection, vigilance, and mutual support. Weeks passed, and small breakthroughs in the investigation began to emerge. Forensic evidence hinted at the possibility that the perpetrator had been familiar with the area, someone who knew the layout of Daniel's ranch and the routines of the girl. Investigators focused on leads in the town, talking to neighbors, checking local records, and following up on tips. Daniel stayed in close contact with them, offering any insight he could, while still tending to his ranch. Though the process was slow, he felt a sense of cautious hope. Through it all, the girl began to recover emotionally. Counseling sessions helped her process the trauma, and visits from Daniel provided reassurance that not all adults were threats. Slowly, she began to regain a sense of security. Daniel's steady presence, combined with the support of the town, helped her rebuild trust and confidence. Watching her recover was deeply moving for him, reinforcing the idea that even in moments of fear and danger, human resilience and kindness could prevail. By the end of the month, life on the ranch began to settle into a new normal. Daniel continued his daily routines, tending to cattle and repairing fences. But he was no longer the same man who had lived in quiet solitude. The incident had changed him, teaching him the value of awareness, the importance of community, and the fragility of safety. The Scarecrow still stood in the field, a silent witness to what had happened, but it no longer symbolized fear alone. It had become a reminder of vigilance, courage, and the power of human connection. Daniel often reflected on the experience, thinking about the girl, the town, and the strange events that had brought them together. The incident had shocked him to his core, but it had also revealed strengths he had not known he possessed. He had faced fear, taken decisive action, and supported someone in need. And in doing so, he had strengthened bonds with the town, deepened his understanding of human resilience, and learned that even in the most unexpected moments, courage and compassion could prevail. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation continued to move slowly but steadily. Daniel spent much of his time on the ranch, tending to the animals and maintaining the property, but his mind often wandered back to the terrifying morning when he had found the girl tied to the Scarecrow. He had learned to live with the memory, but he could not forget the fear in her eyes or the cruel act that had been aimed at him. Each evening, as he walked through the fields, He felt a mixture of vigilance and reflection. The land had been his sanctuary for years. But now it also reminded him that even the quietest places could be invaded by danger. The girl, whose name was Emily, began to regain a sense of normalcy. With support from her family, the town, and the counselors at the hospital, she slowly found her voice again. She could speak about her feelings and describe what had happened, although some details remained unclear. Her bravery impressed Daniel deeply. Despite being only 15, she had remained remarkably calm during the ordeal, and her recovery showed the resilience of a young spirit. Daniel often visited her family, checking in quietly, bringing small gifts from the ranch, and offering reassurance that she was safe. Their gratitude touched him more than words could express. Eventually, the investigation led to a breakthrough. Forensic evidence from the Scarecrow and the field, combined with tips from neighbors, helped the police narrow down a list of possible suspects. It became clear that the person responsible had some familiarity with Daniel's routines and the layout of his property. The town was anxious as the authorities worked tirelessly to identify the perpetrator, but Daniel remained cautiously hopeful. He knew that rushing to conclusions could be dangerous, and he trusted the police to handle the situation carefully. One afternoon, officers returned to the ranch with news that a suspect had been identified. The man was a local resident with a history of causing trouble, someone who had been in conflict with various townspeople in the past. While the motive was still not fully clear, it appeared that Daniel had been chosen because of the reputation he held in the community, a hard-working, solitary man who might be intimidated. The authorities explained that they had collected enough evidence to proceed, and soon, the suspect was arrested. Daniel felt a wave of relief. Justice would be pursued, and the immediate threat to him and the town had been removed. Even as the case moved toward closure, Daniel found himself reflecting on the events and their impact. The incident had forced him to confront fear, to face a moment of crisis, and to act decisively. He realized that he had changed in subtle but important ways. He was no longer just a solitary rancher. He had become someone connected to his community in a new and meaningful way. The support he had received, the resilience he had witnessed in Emily, and the collective effort of the town had taught him the value of human connection. The Scarecrow, once a symbol of terror, took on a new significance. Daniel left it standing in the field, not as a marker of fear, but as a reminder of vigilance and courage. Each time he walked past it, he thought about how quickly life could change and how important it was to act with compassion and responsibility. It reminded him that even in moments of danger, one's actions could make a difference and save lives. Emily continued to heal, returning to school and slowly resuming her normal activities. She remained cautious but felt safer knowing that the town and Daniel were watching over her. Daniel, in turn, found comfort in seeing her regain confidence and joy. Their bond, though formed under unusual and frightening circumstances, was built on trust and mutual respect. Daniel often thought about how such experiences could shape a person, and he felt proud of the strength Emily had shown. Life on the ranch gradually settled into a new rhythm. Daniel continued his work with the animals, repaired fences, and cared for the fields, but he was more aware of his surroundings than ever before. He installed security measures, such as lights and cameras, not out of fear, but out of prudence. The land was still his sanctuary, but he had learned that preparedness was essential. This awareness brought him peace, knowing that he had taken steps to prevent future incidents. The town also reflected on the events. The incident had shaken everyone, but it had also brought people together. Neighbors spoke more openly, looked out for each other, and emphasized the importance of community safety. The shared experience created stronger bonds and a deeper sense of responsibility among the residents. Daniel saw how collective care and vigilance could make a difference, and he felt grateful to be part of a community that could respond with compassion and action. Months passed, and the case officially concluded. The suspect faced legal consequences, and the authorities confirmed that the immediate danger had been removed. Daniel could finally breathe more easily, knowing that justice had been served. Yet the experience left an indelible mark on him. He had confronted fear, acted bravely, and seen the impact of human kindness firsthand. The events of that shocking morning would remain with him forever. But they also reminded him of the strength and resilience inherent in people, both young and old. As the seasons changed, Daniel continued his life on the ranch, embracing the familiar routines that he loved. He fed the cattle, repaired fences, and tended to the fields with care and attention. But he also made small changes, fostering connections with neighbors, visiting Emily and her family, and participating in town safety discussions. His life, once defined by quiet solitude, had become richer and more connected, marked by lessons learned through a moment of extraordinary crisis. Evenings on the porch took on a different tone. Daniel would sit quietly, sipping tea and watching the sun dip below the horizon. The fields glowed in the fading light, the Scarecrow standing as a silent witness to both fear and courage. He reflected on the journey he had been through, the shock of discovering Emily, the tension and investigation that followed, and the eventual resolution. He realized that life could change in an instant, but so could the bonds of trust and support. In his reflections, Daniel found a deep sense of gratitude. He was thankful for his own ability to act decisively, for the bravery Emily had shown, and for the town that had rallied in support. The experience had reminded him that even in solitude, one was never truly alone. The community, the shared humanity, and the courage to confront fear had shaped his understanding of life in ways he could never have anticipated. On one particularly quiet evening, Daniel walked through the fields, pausing at the Scarecrow. The wind rustled the old clothes, and the straw arms swayed gently. He smiled faintly, feeling a sense of closure. The Scarecrow no longer represented terror. It symbolized resilience, vigilance, and the strength of human connection. Daniel knew that life would continue, filled with routine and quiet moments, but also with awareness, responsibility, and a deeper appreciation for the bonds that sustained him. The ranch, the land, and the community remained constants in his life, steady and enduring. Daniel continued to work diligently, care for his animals, and maintain the land, but he did so with a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced a moment of unexpected crisis and emerged stronger, more connected, and more aware of the value of compassion. The events of that shocking day had left their mark, but they had also revealed the best of humanity, the courage to act, the resilience to recover, and the kindness to support one another. In the quiet of the evening, as stars filled the sky and the fields were bathed in moonlight, Daniel felt a calm he had not experienced in a long time. The memory of Emily and the Scarecrow remained, but it was no longer a source of fear. Instead, it was a reminder of what mattered most: courage, connection, and the enduring strength of human spirit. Life had returned to its rhythms, enriched by lessons learned and bonds strengthened, and Daniel faced the future with quiet confidence, knowing that even the most shocking moments could lead to growth, resilience, and hope.